Once a tiny Irish airline, it grew to be the biggest in Europe.
Ryanair is the most successful Irish business story since the creation of Guinness over 250 years ago.
Its controversial boss revolutionised the way we fly.
Michael O'Leary introduced ruthless cost cutting. It gave an expectation to customers that the prices were going to be very low, but you don't expect anything free from Ryanair.
And the company message is clear.
If you like high fares, don't book Ryanair. If you want the guaranteed lowest fares in Europe, fly Ryanair.
Michael O'Leary rules with an iron fist.
The 8:30 Monday morning meeting, somebody was going to get it, and somebody nearly always did get it.
And he's not afraid to upset customers.
She wrote to me last week asking for compensation and a gesture of goodwill, to which we replied, politely but firmly, "Thank you, Mrs. McLeod, but it was your up."
Or his pilots.
You feel constantly at Ryanair detested by management. Detested. That's a carefully picked word there.
Remember all those cancelled flights that ruined people's plans?
Ryanair just sent a message saying your flight's cancelled.
Considering it was meant to be, obviously, the happiest day of your life, the build-up was terrible.
It's a business that's achieved so much, but now faces new warnings of reduced profits. Will its relentless drive to cut costs be its downfall? Is Ryanair really Britain's most hated airline? It's a typically busy Monday at Ryanair's check-in at Dublin Airport. Here you'll be hard-pressed to find anyone who doesn't love Ryanair.
If it wasn't for Ryanair, we'd never be able to go anywhere.
Cheap fares, and we can go anytime we want anywhere in Europe.
You get a seat on the plane, it gets you from A to B. I actually think the service is really good.
I couldn't really afford to go with anybody else anyway, so I'm very happy with Ryanair.
There's little doubt that Ryanair is one of Ireland's favourite subjects.
Other countries have the Kardashians or the English royal family. Ireland has Ryanair. We talk obsessively about it.
Ryanair has been one of the most interesting business stories in Ireland over the last 30 years. It has been an extraordinary development from what was a small regional airline into the powerhouse of European short-haul airlines. In some respects, Ryanair is the most successful Irish business story since the creation of Guinness over 250 years ago.
Many believe it's they we have to thank for the revolution in cheap air travel. So why is it that for all the good, there are also those who still love to hate Ryanair? Now, I do love a short break. Who doesn't? But the trouble with Ryanair is everyone seems to have a story of unfair charges, cancelled or delayed flights. It's an airline that's all too frequently in the bad books. But that wasn't always the case. There was a time when things were different. Very different. Meet Charlie Clifton. In 1985, he was one of their first employees, selling the airline's first ever ticket.
So here we have a photograph of the first 16 employees in Ryanair. That's myself there, the good-looking chap on the right. Good times. It was chaos, but good crack, you know. To have a job and be working there was absolutely fantastic. We'd have all done it for free, no problem.
And I remember actually being on the bus. I was in my uniform and somebody saying to me, "Are you with Ryanair?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And it was kind of like, wow, you know. And I often think about it many times since when I've gone into pubs and quietly said, "I work for Ryanair," and people, "What?" You know, so how things have changed.
When Charlie started, air travel was reserved for the elite.
Well, we had business class. You had smoked salmon and prawns and a free wine. And on a flight from Dublin to Liverpool, try and do a business class service in 17 minutes. You know, it was like the Benny Hill show. You were lashing out the stuff and people were trying to gobble it down, and you were only taking off when you were coming into land. So people were, you know, you were just giving them the tray and then taking it off them.
This really was the golden age of air travel.
There was a culture of free stuff. There was a culture of sense of entitlement. That was still there. And there was a sense of this was not a mass market thing.
So we were doing the same as everybody else, which was giving away lots of stuff and charging a higher fare for it.
Despite charging those bumper fares, Ryanair was loss-making. So in 1994, Tony Ryan, the owner of the airline, called upon his protégé, a young accountant called Michael O'Leary, to see if he could turn his airline's fortunes around.
The trouble was, Michael O'Leary said himself he never wanted to be chief executive. The company was hemorrhaging money, and he repeatedly told Tony Ryan to close the airline down.
Back in the 80s, airlines such as Aer Lingus and British Airways rarely made money, but they received big government subsidies, and the non-flag carriers rarely survived. But over in America, there was one privately owned and profitable airline owned by a man who did things a little differently. This is Herb Kelleher, the then head of Southwest Airlines. He loved to show off his unique way of doing business.
Southwest Airlines, to its credit, always had a kind of open door policy. They would welcome you in and they'd say, here's how we do things. It's different from other airlines. It works for us. We've cut our costs to this level. That means that we've been able to cut fares, and as a result of that, traffic has gone through the roof. So here's how to be one of the good guys.
Tony Ryan sent Michael O'Leary to meet Herb Kelleher.
Michael O'Leary, according to legend, went out, got sozzled with him, and picked his brain for all the various ideas, and then claims to have been unable to remember the following morning as to what it was Kelleher had told him.
The formula was quite simple. Only use one make of plane, fly more routes every day, and more importantly, pilots and staff should work much harder.
It just seemed to be blatantly obvious that this was the way forward. And that's what started the revolution in low-fare air travel in Europe.
Michael O'Leary realised the possibilities for Ryanair and then came back and convinced a pretty sceptical board that actually the way to get to profitability is not to put up fares, it's to cut them.
And that also meant no more free stuff.
I remember the conversation before we stopped giving away tea and coffee. People internally were saying, this is the end of the company now. This is actually the end of the company because Irish people will not travel unless they have a cup of tea.
But accountant and now CEO of Ryanair, Michael O'Leary, really had seen the light.
He introduced ruthless cost cutting. What that did was it gave an expectation to customers that the prices were going to be very low, but you don't expect anything free from Ryanair.
By the mid-1990s, the low-cost revolution had begun, a time when another airline was also trying out the Southwest Airline formula.
This is the startup team at EasyJet in the summer of 1995.
Tony Anderson, EasyJet's former head of marketing and founder Stelios's right-hand man, also made the pilgrimage to America. They too were offering unbelievably low fares.
I remember the day that we launched EasyJet, and I remember standing up and he said, the price of our first flight to Glasgow is going to be £29. And pretty much every journalist in the room laughed. Now, at that moment, if someone had said, give it another 10 years, you'll have an airline like Ryanair, which is flying people for less than £1 in some cases, and they'll be one of the most profitable airlines on the planet, I don't think anybody would have believed it.
The low-cost revolution meant overnight those who rarely flew were eyeing up trips abroad. Students and pensioners were now planning foreign mini breaks. The world had suddenly become a much smaller place.
And families that maybe travelled once a year were now holidaying way more often, like the Cameron family from Manchester. Mum Kerry, daughters Caitlin and Alicia, and Grandma Joanna. They are what can now be described as frequent flyers.
Hi guys. Hi. Hello, I'm Fiona. Nice to see you.
You too.
But I'd love to know where you've been on your holidays.
We go to Ibiza, we go to Fuerteventura.
This year we went to Bulgaria, didn't we?
Yeah.
I've been to Poland and so have you.
Yeah, we're doing a few little trips, haven't we? So.
What's your experience been of flying so far?
It's not as good as it used to be, because you used to get free coffee, free tea.
And wine.
Oh, you did.
You have experience of flying more than most people, don't you?
Yes, I did cabin crew.
How do you think it's changed flying?
You get a lot less now when you fly. I also think the food was better
better because you used to get hot meals free. So there's loads of things that's changed.
Okay, so we want you to compare two airlines. You are going to be going on Ryanair to Venice with Alicia. And Joanna, you and Caitlin are going to be going on EasyJet to Venice.
Oh, that's better. Can we not trade?
No, you can't trade, and I'm going to send you off now, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. So,
excellent.
Okay, you better start packing.
Low-cost air travel is also known as no frills. The question is, can these airlines retain low costs and still keep customers like the Cameron family happy?
It wasn't long ago.
Ryanair's path to enormous profits began with Chief Executive Michael O'Leary's ruthless drive to strip out costs.
To be low cost, you really have to eat, sleep, drink and believe in low cost.
And all through the 90s, he was said to be on a warpath with anyone who wasted company money. And every Monday morning at 8:30, he held a much-feared management meeting.
I thought it was horrific. I always hated it. It was nerve-tingling. It was spin the bottle.
Tim Jeans was the commercial director of Ryanair back then, and he never dared miss a meeting.
I rather liken it to, you see the wildebeest drinking at the watering hole, and suddenly a crocodile comes out and grabs one of them. And then the rest of the wildebeest say, oh, thank God that wasn't me. And that was a bit like us at the Monday morning meeting. Somebody was going to get it. And somebody nearly always did get it.
For Michael O'Leary, these meetings were all about running Ryanair with ever greater efficiency.
I remember my wife used to phone me up at 11:30 when it finished to see if I was still in a job.
Michael O'Leary says himself the meetings were robust, but that it was a two-way thing. So decisions were made to keep maintenance costs down to only fly one type of plane. Inside, the seats would no longer recline and seat pockets were gone.
All of our pilots can fly all the planes. We only need one bank of spares for all those planes. The cabin crew, when they get on board, know that all the galleys and everything will be in exactly the same spot. So it's simply replicating a simple formula and making it simpler and simpler. The more simple we can make it, the more lower cost and efficient it will be.
Waste was a swear word according to insiders, and anyone found frittering the company's cash would get a roasting. And that even included one lucky, or as it turned out unlucky, customer by the name of Jane O'Keefe.
Jane O'Keefe was the millionth passenger to fly on Ryanair, and Jane got free flights for life. Now, most sensible people would have found an 80-year-old nun from Knock who, with the best will in the world, probably wasn't going to survive more than 10 years. But Jane O'Keefe was, I think at the time, in her mid-20s. She had family in England and was clearly going to avail of this offer of free flights for life. And so she did, in a perfectly reasonable, non-excessive way.
To claim her free flights, Jane would call Tim Jeans personally and he would sign it off. Except one day, Michael O'Leary took Jane's call.
And it's fair to say there was a bit of an explosion when Michael found out that somebody was entitled to free flights for life. He came in clutching a piece of paper and threw it on my desk and said, "What the is this?" And I explained what it was and the background, and the instruction was given, take them away.
Jane was not happy. Not so much about the loss of the prize, more the way Michael O'Leary had spoken to her. She said he was hostile and aggressive. She took Ryanair to court and the judge found in her favour, awarding her €43,000.
I can only reiterate what I said in court, which was that I was shabbily treated by them, and the judgment has vindicated me.
TV News covered the story for days, but even though Michael O'Leary lost, he was said to be delighted with the publicity.
Michael O'Leary doesn't believe that any publicity is bad publicity.
We did get a load of publicity and we were all over the television, but none of us, and certainly not me, felt good about it.
The trouble was, this confrontational way of doing business was going to cause Michael O'Leary problems in years to come. And over in EasyJet headquarters, eyebrows were being raised.
I think in terms of their respective positioning, Ryanair was always a little bit brasher. It was always willing to push the envelope just that little bit further. Michael O'Leary upset a lot of people. He pretty much broke every rule in the customer service handbook.
Michael O'Leary courted controversy, suggesting fat passengers paid more, there could be a standing area on planes, and famously, of course, suggesting paying to use the toilet. Oh, and then there was the tank.
I've been told and it's no lie. I've been told and it's no lie. These jet fares are far too high. These jet fares are far too high.
He drove a Second World War, I think it was a Sherman tank, belching smoke up the hill to Luton Airport with a long queue of traffic in his wake. I can't remember what his beef was with EasyJet. I'm pretty sure there was one. Someone from EasyJet stole the keys for the tank, and the whole thing degenerated into a little bit of a melee with airport security saying, "You ain't coming any further with that thing."
A lot of people feel that he's a little bit too vulgar and crass, but others celebrate him on the basis that he gets things done. He cuts through the waffle and he actually achieves and delivers what people want. And what he believes people want is low fares, and nothing else really matters.
In Michael O'Leary's fierce drive to cut costs, there was one set of people he really didn't like. They were travel agents. He hated paying them commission for selling his tickets. Then along came a thing called the internet.
The emergence of the internet could not have been more timely for Ryanair. Travel agents controlled access to information. They controlled access to tickets. They had very, very big profits.
Initially, the internet was a banned word at Ryanair. If you mentioned the internet at a Monday morning management meeting, you were in danger of having a glass ashtray thrown at you.
Michael O'Leary was something of a technophobe. He didn't even want to use a computer inside in his office, despite the fact that he hated the travel agents and hated the commission that they took from him.
Cue internet entrepreneur John Beckett. As a teenager, he would design websites for local businesses and had done work experience with one of the Ryanair managers in the past. In 1999, aged just 16, he was called into Ryanair's HQ.
I got a call and I was basically asked to come in and have a chat, over coffee about the website. So I came in after school one day. I was just wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I thought I was meeting just for a quick coffee, and suddenly was marched into the boardroom with the senior management team. That was quite intimidating, I was 16, and they asked some kind of difficult questions around what I would propose doing and what I had done in the past, building websites, what I would recommend for them.
Michael O'Leary was so keen to stop paying commission to travel agents, he decided to give John a try.
I didn't know how much to charge, certainly, because they were very insistent that they wanted it yesterday. That was the line: we wanted this finished yesterday. They basically said to me, we want the cheapest price and the shortest time. So I picked a number out of thin air. I had no idea that the next cheapest quote they got was €4.5 million. So I quoted them 20 grand.
This bargain price of just €20,000 was irresistible to O'Leary, who jumped at the offer.
It took about a month of full-time work, but that was spread out over about 2 months because I actually had my mocks in the middle of this, so we had to kind of pause things while they were completed. That was non-negotiable with my parents.
In the year 2000, the super cheap website was an instant success. Selling directly to the customer, Ryanair switched off the travel agent's booking system. O'Leary was over the moon, and so was teenager John.
I would have liked to charge a little bit more in hindsight. If I'd gone in asking for 50 grand, would they have paid it? Maybe, maybe not. But at the end of the day, they took a punt on a student. I really would have done it for free.
The new website gave Ryanair direct access to the public who could book a flight in the comfort of their own homes. But it also gave Ryanair the chance to charge more for all those added extras you might want, such as a suitcase or a particular seat on a plane. So now when you try and book online, the cost of a flight can quickly shoot up. Earlier, we met the Cameron family from Manchester who've agreed to fly EasyJet and Ryanair to Venice and compare the experience. First to navigate the website are Kerry and Alicia, who are flying Ryanair.
So we're going to book our flights to Venice via Ryanair. It's not going to the centre though.
No, so we're probably going to have to add an hour and trying to get to the middle.
If we go by coach, it's going to be an extra £10.61 each. Or if we want to go by a car, it's £84 per person. So I think we'll be going on the coach.
At this stage, the flight's total is just shy of £30 for the two of them. Joanna and Caitlin are booking EasyJet.
It's going straight to the centre of Venice.
Oh, good.
And the lowest fare is
£45.38.
So EasyJet's price for the both of them is £90. But we're only at the start of the booking process. You can sit for free on EasyJet flights, but if you want to make sure you sit together, you have to pay. So Joanna and Caitlin have chosen seats costing $5.99 each. Same on Ryanair.
Oh, well, we definitely want to sit together because you're too young to be sat by yourself. So we've already paid for that and then we've got to pay for this.
On Ryanair, you can take one small bag on for free, but you have to pay to take a larger second case. On EasyJet, it's all free.
So that's an extra £12.
So the total cost for 2 adults plus luggage on Ryanair would be £68 one way. EasyJet Venice flights are £102 one way. They fly in a few days, but how was it navigating the Ryanair website?
It wasn't clear what I was paying until the end.
That difference between the advertised price and what you actually end up paying has landed Ryanair in hot water with long-running battles and big fines. With Ryanair, the prices advertised are only for a seat plus a small carry-on bag, and anything else is extra.
And this was the very crux of Michael O'Leary's business model. Charge a tiny amount for a seat on the plane and then ask passengers to pay for lots of optional extras, which soon add up. And what better captive audience to sell to than those stuck on a plane?
From scratch cards to sandwiches to drink, it's all about maximising the revenue per passenger, and ancillary sales at Ryanair, the additional money on top of what it costs to buy a seat, has become an increasingly important part of its profits, and Michael O'Leary and Ryanair make no apology for that.
These ancillary sales were making the airline a fortune and now account for 28% of their revenue at over €2 billion a year.
Michael O'Leary was reported as saying that if anyone looks like they're sleeping, we will wake them up and sell them things.
Flights were now an endless procession of trolley runs. Fran used to be part of Ryanair's cabin crew, and he says that staff had to hit sales targets to top up low basic wages.
The senior cabin crew would tell us every morning what the targets are for that day and what we have to sell. So maybe I would have to sell over 40 teas and chocolates and 60 bottles of water. And if you don't get those targets, you can be sent to Ireland and you can even get fired.
And it's not just about selling hard, it's about working hard too. Michael O'Leary wanted planes in the sky and not on the ground, and that meant 25-minute turnarounds.
It was like the craziest things on the flights. Once you land, you only have 25 minutes to get people off the plane, clean all the aircraft, and then make the boarding again. So that would be really stressing.
To incentivise cabin crew like Fran to move quickly, Ryanair only paid him for time spent in the air and not on the tarmac.
You don't get paid for what you do on the ground, which means that when you have to clean the aircraft, when you have to get everything ready for the passengers to make the boarding, you don't get paid for that. You only get paid for what you do on the sky.
Ryanair staff knew that planes had to keep moving, and if anyone felt that pressure more, it was pilot Jim Atkinson, who was employed through an agency to fly for Ryanair. He was in a long-running dispute with management over how they treated staff. After he tried to set up his own crewing company for fellow pilots, he was dismissed from the agency he worked for.
You definitely had to work harder. The days were long. I was flying out of Rome. I would say a typical day flying out of Rome is show up in the morning at about 6 o'clock in the morning, sometimes 5:30. First departure, say to Paris-Beauvais Airport, that's an hour and a half each way. The second departure is up to Eindhoven near Amsterdam, that's 2 hours each way, which it would be hard to imagine actually at a different airline. I'd never done days that long before.
The airline kept within the European flight time limitations and had an unblemished safety record. But working staff hard and slapping loads of extra charges onto customers was to lead to even more turbulence.
Michael O'Leary doesn't believe in the idea that your employees are your biggest assets. He regards employees almost like a liability to an extent.
quote, no frills, low fare. Whatever you call it, Ryanair and its competitor EasyJet have changed the way we fly. Plane travel's now like bus travel, and it's cheap. But is it any good? In Manchester, we've asked a family of frequent flyers to fly the same destination on EasyJet and on Ryanair to see how they compare.
There's my PJs.
All four will film themselves flying to Venice. 2 will go with Ryanair and 2 EasyJet. Ryanair testers are mum Kerry and daughter Alicia. They need to check in online or face a fine.
They will get charged £55 each.
For not checking in?
Yeah. That'd be more than the flight.
EasyJet won't charge Joanna and Caitlin should they forget to check in online.
Right, we're on our way to Venice at gate 48.
We're getting closer and closer, so we're getting quite excited now.
Kerry and Alicia paid £12 for a bag and priority boarding, and it seems so is everyone else.
So we're just in our queue at priority boarding. However, it's a bit long.
Ryanair says priority boarding is capped at 100 of the 189 passengers per flight. Kerry and Alicia waited 25 minutes in this queue. Yet on the EasyJet flight, Joanna and Caitlin didn't pay extra and walked straight on. The Ryanair flight would sit on the tarmac for 35 minutes before taking off. EasyJet waited 20 minutes. But once in the air, both airlines were quick to start selling. Time for our product testers to start work.
We've got no seat pockets.
We've got nothing to put the magazine in.
I can't put my iPad anywhere.
What about the onboard cuisine?
Unfortunately, it looks pretty disgusting. It looks very grey.
It's actually really nice.
Thumbs up for EasyJet Nosh. The flight is nearing its end, but while EasyJet land near the centre of Venice, Ryanair's heading to a much smaller airport 40 minutes drive north of the city.
I don't see any water.
Well, hopefully we will do.
Yeah, because we're going to Venice.
Yeah.
The day we flew, EasyJet cost £102 for 2 adults. The equivalent on Ryanair came to £68. But they're not in Venice yet. There's a bus ride to go. It might be cheaper, but is the hassle worth the saving? Ryanair has made a bit of a thing of flying into smaller, cheaper airports miles from the cities it claims to fly to. An idea which, back in the day, even had EasyJet looking on with envy.
The fundamental difference between EasyJet and Ryanair is that EasyJet flies you largely from places you've heard of to other places that you've heard of, whereas Ryanair flies you from places you've heard of to places you haven't heard of, places you've never heard of in many cases. And the genius in that formula is that there are a lot more places in Europe that you haven't heard of than those that you have.
Smaller airports were perfect. They were considerably cheaper to use than the main city airports and desperate for business.
So we discovered unknown places near Stockholm, unknown places not very near Oslo, and some places that weren't even in the same country as the airport they were apparently serving. And that was Malmö in the case of Copenhagen, which was in Sweden, obviously.
With smaller airports signed up, then began the process of renaming them. Another brilliant Ryanair idea.
You've got this funny little airport in Western Germany, quite close to Luxembourg, which Ryanair decided it was going to call Frankfurt Hahn, even though, and I've done the bus journey from there, it takes an hour and a half, and along the way you call in at the real Frankfurt airport.
People knew when they were flying to Paris Beauvais that they weren't flying to Charles de Gaulle. And if they were unsure, all they needed to do was look at the price of their ticket, because that was the deal. You know, you got your ticket for 30 quid, and you got your bus ticket for 7 quid, and it was 37 quid to get into Paris. Happy days, versus 250 quid to get into Charles de Gaulle.
But was it happy days for everyone? By 2010, even though Ryanair was enjoying unprecedented growth and profits, it seemed rarely a month would go by without stories of how the company was upsetting its customers. And it was usually over those extra charges. Passenger Susie McLeod found out what it was like to get on the wrong side of Michael O'Leary.
We've got us on holiday in France, and then there's some of Tenerife.
Returning from a family holiday in Spain, Susie hadn't printed out her boarding passes. So when she checked in, she was told to hand over €300 to print them off. She was furious and posted a complaint on the company's website. And Michael O'Leary responded personally.
Michael O'Leary was very vocal in response to this. He didn't hold back. He's called me stupid for not printing them. And he said that anyone that didn't print their boarding passes were also stupid.
The Daily Telegraph reported this story and asked Michael O'Leary for comment.
Michael O'Leary's response is, she wrote to me last week asking for compensation and a gesture of goodwill, to which we replied, politely but firmly, thank you, Mrs. McLeod, but it was your up. He claimed that 99.98% of Ryanair passengers did print their boarding passes in advance. To those who don't, we politely say, bugger off.
Everyone knows that the first rule of the service industry is that the customer is always right. Oddly enough, though, Michael O'Leary didn't seem to think that applied to Ryanair.
Not surprising then that Ryanair has been awarded lots of titles any company would be ashamed of. In 2009 it was voted worst family brand, in 2011 the second worst short-haul airline, and 2012 Which magazine's worst European short-haul airline, a title it held on to for 6 years, winning again this year. Ryanair told us these surveys don't really reflect reality and that it boasts an average 85% satisfaction rating.
Michael O'Leary has always believed that if you are the lowest cost provider, then yeah, you can upset people and yet they will still come back. They actually gloried in their reputation as being a brand that people didn't like. The whole message was, if you don't like us, you can fly with somebody else and pay a much higher fare.
But in 2014, passenger numbers were in decline. For the first time in 5 years, Ryanair's profits were down by 8%, while EasyJet's were up by 21%. For Michael O'Leary, the penny finally dropped. He needed to be nice to customers.
So the airline launched a campaign called Always Getting Better. And Michael O'Leary reassured everyone Ryanair's more fluffy now.
Michael O'Leary decided, well, he could do better by having this warmer approach, more caring approach towards his customers. So a decision was taken, be more proactive in being nice to customers.
Ryanair was now offering allocated seats for a price, free carry-on luggage, and they agreed to charge less for printing out boarding passes. And lo and behold, being nice to customers worked.
You could argue that Always Getting Better has actually been an enormous success because profits trebled within 5 years. Passenger numbers doubled.
Ryanair became the #1 carrier in Europe. But behind the scenes, relations with staff were far from rosy, storing up problems for the future.
Michael O'Leary doesn't believe in the idea that your employees are your biggest assets. He regards employees almost like a liability to an extent. There's something that has to be paid for. He has a particular dislike for pilots. Going back to the early days of Ryanair, he regards them as rather arrogant and self-serving.
And nothing underlined his dislike of pilots more than when he described them as no more than glorified taxi drivers.
Remember unhappy pilot Jim? He had little doubt how the company felt about his profession.
You feel constantly at Ryanair detested by management. Detested. That's a carefully picked word there. Because that's how they look at you. If they could replace pilots with a computer and replace cabin crew with a vending machine, you know when you're working there, they would do that.
Many of Ryanair's cabin crew and pilots across Europe were unhappy. But as Michael O'Leary refused to negotiate with unions, staff with a grievance had nowhere to go.
What bothers people at Ryanair is they have no recourse whatsoever. If Ryanair does something which is unjust or unfair, they have no recourse.
Unhappy pilots were to become the undoing of the Michael O'Leary way of doing business, and despite promises of always getting better, things were about to get much worse when hundreds of thousands of passengers found their travel plans wrecked. in Italy and our family from Manchester have arrived. Kerry and Alicia flew Ryanair. The adult price for two was £68 one way.
Let's go and try and find how we get to the centre of Venice.
Remember, EasyJet flights were £102 one way. Ryanair flights were cheaper, but they're not in Venice.
So we've got to get two transfers.
So that's another £20.
So after being on the coach for over 30 minutes, we can finally see some water.
It's a short trip to finally meet the others at St Mark's Square.
How was your flight?
That's really good.
You should see the queue for our priority boarding. The other queue was shorter than our queue.
How was your food?
The food wasn't very good at all. I had to buy another sandwich because the chicken was looking a bit grey.
Oh no, we had the best food, didn't we? It was cheap as well.
Michael O'Leary believes the main thing that matters most is being the cheapest. At first, his customers agreed. Low-cost fares meant passenger numbers went through the roof. But in 2017, this super-efficient business model started to unravel, and it was no longer carrying the most passengers in Europe.
If you wanted to define Ryanair's annus horribilis, it would be the year from September 2017 probably till August 2018. That was the time that, first of all, they found they didn't have enough pilots, and then they faced a whole range of strikes, both within the airline and problems with French and Italian air traffic controllers.
And who can forget the mass cancellation of flights? Many of those hard-working pilots had just finished a long summer of flying and had booked holidays at the same time. Ryanair was forced to cancel 20,000 flights, affecting hundreds of thousands of passengers.
This was the first major crisis for Ryanair in quite a long time in dealing with its customers.
It was a PR disaster. Passengers, even on their way to the airport, were receiving texts from Ryanair saying their flights had been cancelled. Customers like Roxy and Tom.
9 o'clock it was, I think. Ryanair just sent a message saying your flight's cancelled. Follow the link to rebook or claim a refund.
This was a disaster for Roxy and Tom, who were on their way to Slovenia to get married.
We just felt let down.
Yeah, we did, massively.
Like many others affected by cancelled flights, the alternative flights offered were too late. The cost of the ticket was refunded, but Roxy, Tom and their guests still had to find a way to get to the wedding on time. It wouldn't be easy or cheap.
Travelled to Heathrow in a taxi, that's about £200. And then we had a flight to Dublin, and it was a connecting flight then to Pula in Croatia, so we were effectively going back on ourselves. But that was the closest we could get to Slovenia. And then the cab from Croatia to Slovenia, we must have spent nearly £2,000.
This couple's story was not uncommon. Tens of thousands of others missed holidays, weddings, funerals, and were left seriously out of pocket.
It dampened the spirits.
Yeah, it brought it down.
Yeah.
It really brought it down. Considering it was meant to be, obviously, the happiest day of your life.
Which a wedding day was.
Yeah, but the build-up was terrible.
Without compensation, Tom and Roxy and the others were seriously unhappy with Ryanair. Ryanair say they comply with all rules around compensation and process all valid claims within an industry-leading 10 working days. Those affected were refunded and given a €40 voucher. But this was far from the end of the airline's troubles.
It also led on to other problems in that it suddenly weakened their hand in dealing with the pilots. The pilots suddenly had leverage in the relationship with Ryanair, and by threatening further strikes, we got to a situation whereby, just before Christmas in 2017, Ryanair had to recognise trade unions for the first time their right to negotiate with Ryanair.
Ryanair pilots across Europe held a series of strikes demanding better conditions. Again, thousands of affected customers were told they would not be compensated for their cancelled flights.
They had waited for decades to have the upper hand on the airline. They'd always been paid well, but they'd always had staff relationships which were extremely controversial and very hard-nosed.
Ryanair has now started talking to unions, but efficiency and the ability to be flexible has always been the very bedrock to keeping costs down. The question for Ryanair now is, will the unions undo all of this?
The Ryanair model was based on efficiency and being able to make quick decisions without reference to third parties. We were able to take those decisions overnight, doing 25-minute turnarounds if you had to negotiate with a union who said, well, hang on a second.
The turmoil of 2017-2018 hit profits and drove up costs. And you know how much Michael O'Leary hates costs. And this year, they've already issued a profit warning, the second in 4 months. To recoup some cash, Michael O'Leary upset customers once again by taking away that nicety of 2 free cabin bags.
Basically, unless you can fly priority or fit everything into the tiniest of bags, you want an extra £6 to £8 each way.
I was very annoyed with the extra charge, even more so because it was my birthday trip and me and my friend were travelling to Belfast on a low-cost budget airline.
Lee took to social media to show the lengths he would go to avoid paying the extra cost.
I thought it'd be a nice idea to actually stitch a pair of old boxer shorts in there just for effect, but you got the front pocket.
All future flights I've done since then, I've packed all my stuff into a coat that actually folds into a bag.
These bag charges have since gone up. Last December, Ryanair was told by the Civil Aviation Authority it will have to pay compensation to those passengers affected by strike action. In response, Michael O'Leary reportedly called the CAA lazy and his pilots a bunch of layabouts. It seems Ryanair is back in the bad books again.
There is no doubt there is something of a crisis, but it's a crisis for a business that is still making over €1 billion profits per annum, that is still the biggest short-haul airline in Europe, that has lots of new aircraft coming to it, which it has to find routes and passengers for, but is focused on actually doing that. Anyone who now says that Ryanair, despite having perhaps more problems than it's had before, is going to fail as a result of it, I think they're going to find that their call is wrong.
The Cameron family from Manchester are back from their trip to Venice. Caitlin and Grandma Joanna flew EasyJet and it all seemed to go well. But what about Kerry and daughter Alicia, who flew Ryanair? So, Kerry, how was the Ryanair experience?
It was challenging from the beginning, to be fair. We booked priority boarding, which was great. However, it looked like every other passenger booked it, and I think we were stood waiting for about 25 minutes to get on the plane. We had to get off the plane, then we had to get a coach, but then we had to wait 20 minutes for the coach, and then it was a 40-minute journey. So,
was there anything good about the flight?
The staff were so nice, like really friendly.
The EasyJet flight cost £102 for 2 adults. The equivalent Ryanair flights would be £68 plus £20 for the bus. So the Ryanair flight is £14 cheaper. Was it all worth it for that saving?
No, definitely not. I'd rather have gone to the centre of Venice, saved time, and got to Venice sooner and pay that little bit extra.
So, Michael O'Leary's been 25 years at the helm now. His genius, of course, was to build a multi-billion-pound airline based on cheap, safe, low-cost air travel, all the while seemingly upsetting customers and staff, it seems. The question is, how long can that business model last?
Ryanair told us that it continues to offer the lowest fares in Europe and the best customer experience, which is why 140 million people will choose to fly with them this year. So the airline has to make a difficult calculation. It needs to keep the costs as low as possible to keep ticket prices down. That sometimes means unhappy staff and service that might leave a little bit to be desired. Go too far and they risk driving customers into the arms of their competitors. But get it right, then the sky is the limit.
There's actually a huge way to go for Ryanair, even within Europe. Although it flies 100 million people, there's room for it to fly 200 million people, even within Europe.
If he can maintain this low-cost position that he has obsessively fought for over the last 25 years, then the intention for Ryanair is to continue to offer lower fares than its rivals.
I genuinely think that Ryanair and Michael O'Leary have done more to bind Europe together as a concept, to liberate people to have long-distance romances, to go and get great jobs in other countries. In the overall scheme of things, we are so much better off as passengers than we were before Ryanair was born.